Yes, my friends, here we are, another episode of the Tyler Hill Podcast. I have someone who I've been following on Instagram for a little bit. And as I mentioned in the intro, I'm pumped because I think there's going to be a myriad of intersections in this episode as we talk about beverages and hospitality and old spiritualities and new spiritualities. I love when many worlds collide because, as we often talk about, the divine is in it all. It is all so deeply spiritual. So, Jeremy Jernigan, thank you for coming onto the Tyler Hill podcast where we will talk about it all.
Absolutely, man. I'm stoked for this. It's quite the setup. I mean, let's go. I'm
Let
pumped.
let's do it. We were just talking off mic. I find you in the heat of Arizona where it is a
Yes.
cool 99 degrees today.
We're on the way down.
Come on. Um, so whether you find yourself, let's start here in Arizona or on a trip somewhere. We obviously are people. We're more than what we know. We're more than what we teach. If you had, say, a couple extra $100, you had a good long weekend, you had some time to yourself or your family to do what you do, what makes Jeremy just light up? What makes you come alive? What are you doing with a little bit of extra time and money that just fills your soul?
So the question to your question is there kids involved or no kids?
Uh,
Because it's
uh,
a completely different answer.
let's say no kids. I want to know all about Jeremy, what just lights him up. What really is he into?
Love it. I would be spending a weekend with my wife traveling somewhere, and we would be eating good food, and she would be taking me somewhere I've never been before because she likes to try new things. Like, she's very adventurous. She's the extrovert, I'm the introvert, and so it's been really good for me to be married to someone that constantly, takes me out of my comfort zone. So we'd probably try some new restaurants that we've never tried before. Everything would be, a totally different experience. We also have places we love. We love Disneyland. We have spent a lot of our time in like Oregon wine country. So that would be a place we love. But if we're exploring somewhere new, we'd be all over it.
You just used the D word, which is Disneyland, which now we might not get to anything spiritual now that
Oh,
we're talking
yes.
about Disneyland and or wine and whiskey or whatever else. We too are big Disney
Yes.
people. I got Peter Pan's hat right here tattooed on my arm.
Dude, Tyler, we just became best friends. Peter Pan is my favorite
There it is.
Disney character.
Come on.
I'm not even kidding you.
I
Like,
love it.
I want to
I,
give you a virtual
oh,
hug right now.
this is it. I'm telling you, I knew this was going to be a good one. Well, let's get into it then. When you walk into the park, do you go under the right gate or the left gate? Which
Hmm.
gate is yours? And then where do you go when you walk into the park?
Oh man, it again, we've done it so many different ways. So we've done the day hopper, the single park, try to do it all. We've realized if you have kids, you got to just commit to a park. That's what because we've got 5 kids and some of them are little. So it's like, all right, we got to commit to one park. They can't keep up if we
Yep.
do two. But if it's like my wife and I, man, we would do both parks. We usually start at California, get all those in, and then save the Disney stuff for the end of the day. Pirates of the Caribbean's my favorite ride. Just think it's the greatest ride ever. But yeah, I mean, we're all about the churros. I drink my way through Disney, so California Adventures got this great like beer drink that I think is amazing. So we usually start there and then try to like circle back at some point so I can get like round two later in the day.
Love it.
But there's no way to go wrong. I mean, Disney's so fun. We got invited to Club 33 one time and got to have dinner there and it just wrecked us. And so we've been trying, that's like one of our life goals, like trying to get into Club 33.
So cool. Yeah, I've never been. I have a cousin who's Japanese and she's like a Disney influencer for like Tokyo Disney and she got to go into Club 33. And for those who are not Disney literate. It's like this super exclusive club inside Disneyland, celebrities, hundreds of thousands of dollars for a membership every year. It's super dope. But yeah, my cousin got to go also, and through her just influencer perks and stuff. But tell me then, like, let's really go there for a minute though. Like what really lights you and your wife and your family up about this experience? Like, I think now more than ever, to be honest, we're being drawn toward immersive, communal, in-person experiences. What about that lights your soul up? And what is important even about experiences like something at Disney or even sipping wine and having these visceral, these tangible experiences? What does that do in your soul? Why Disney? Why like what happens inside of you? What happens inside of us? Why are we drawn to things like that, Jeremy?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that when I was younger, I would say spending money on experiences was a waste. I always felt like after an experience, you had nothing to show for it. This is like a phrase I used to use, right? Like if you go on a trip, after that trip's over, you've spent it, it's done, you have nothing to show for it. And I really had that mentality for a lot of years. I have completely flipped on that mentality. And now I think the stuff, yeah, you might be able to buy stuff, but like, so what? I want to have experiences. I want to have life. And what we realized, I read a book years ago. I don't know if you ever heard of this book called Die with Zero.
Mm,
And completely was a game changer for us. And the whole idea in the book is that we think about money as like we're going to save up, save up, save up, right? And we have retirement, and then one day you're going to unleash all this. And kind of the idea we live is like, hey, you should die with a huge bank account and like all of this stuff saved up, and like that's how you did it well. And the book challenges the idea of like, no, live your life, like use your time, use your resources, like use it all in the moments that you have. And so we really have tried to live like that, where we could save more money, we could put aside more things, but like we have kids at this season and we're making the most of it, and we have this time and we have our health, and we're like, none of that's guaranteed. And so I think it's really a way of embracing life. Like life happens with people, life happens in moments. And so you can kind of put it aside to another day, but life happens when you're sitting next to that person. Life happens when you're processing, hey, here's the news today. What do you think about it? Or here's an idea I just read. What do you think about it? I mean, that's life. And, anybody that has young kids, like life happens when you don't schedule it, when you don't have it planned. I'm like, when I'm tired and they're ready to go to bed, I'm like, all right, peace out. And they're like, Dad, I've got a question. It's always like, it's going to be the best question you've asked me all day. And I can either be like, look, let's get to that tomorrow, or like that's life, like that's the moment. And so I think I'm at a stage in my life where I'm realizing it's the moments with people, it's the shared experience, and it doesn't have to be, it can be Disneyland and that's awesome, but it doesn't have to be. It can be just sitting next to a person who you've done a lot of life with. And even as an introvert, I can just be near my wife,
mhm,
and like that's fulfilling to me. And like we don't even have to talk. She likes to talk more, but like I just like being around her. And so I think I'm at a season where like life happens in community, and not, I come from the Christian space where community is a life group, and it's, formal. Like, no, life just happens when
mhm,
you're with people, you're processing things, and then unexpected beauty emerges out of it.
mhm, mhm. Tell me how you got to that place. And I heard two little themes that I'm really interested in, and I think we'll dive into your story from evangelicalism to where you are now. We'll touch into that in a minute. But like knowing that you came from kind of a more traditionally Christian space, I heard you mention money and how you spend money. I'm really curious how that has evolved for you in the ways in which maybe more Western Christian sort of evangelical spaces we talk about how do we spend money or don't, especially when it comes to scarcity and abundance and having nice things or having good wine or going to Disneyland. I'm curious how that has evolved, and how have you evolved in your ability to see life more as an in-present experience. Like I hear you saying on earth as it is in heaven. I hear you saying we're going to live in the moment. We're not living to escape reality. We're living to experience reality with people around a table, around wine. How did you begin to really embody that in your life as you embody it now? What was that journey like for you, Jeremy?
Hmm. One of the byproducts of being a pastor in a community is you get to see a lot of the behind the scenes of people's lives. And so I spent 2 decades doing that and seeing a lot of very successful people in all different ways that you might measure success, and so seeing people who had all of it financially, and yet you'd watch part of their soul die every day as they went to their job. And I remember just kind of like, oh, I don't want to be that. And I've watched that play out in a lot of people, and that seems to be kind of the norm in our culture where, hey, sacrifice whatever you got to sacrifice, but like do the right thing, show up every day. And I started to realize, because I was paid well in the roles that I was in, and life made sense, and it was pretty comfortable. And I started to realize this idea of like golden handcuffs, where you can actually be so comfortable with something, things are so good that you really become numb to life. You can become numb to the people who don't have what you have, but you can also just become numb to your own experience, where you're not fully experiencing things anymore. And I think it was partly watching people go through that, but then some of my own journey of realizing, like, do I want to play it safe, do what makes sense, have the life that, looks great on paper, and maybe my soul dies in the process? Or do I want to lean into the unknown, lean into where I sense the spirit nudging me that is honestly a bit terrifying and scares the shit out of me, if I'm honest? Like,
Yep.
where does that go, And I think it's been in this like slow invitation, probably starting in my 20s, that I feel like Jesus just been like, look, let's get wild with this, and calling me out of the predictable and the safe. And now I look back, a lot of interactions when I have with people in that space, in that community, it's almost hard for me to mentally go back there, because it's like, oh yeah, I do remember what it felt like in this space. I do remember how you might be processing this, but I don't do that anymore. And a big thing for me in my story is realizing my spiritual giftedness leans toward a prophetic voice. And people are, hear that and they're like, oh, he's calling himself a prophet, how arrogant. I don't think of prophecy as a gift. I think of it as a burden.
Mm,
And it hasn't been a gift in my life, it's been a burden in my life. It has always cost me something, it has never brought in anything. And so I don't say that as like, yeah, rah rah rah, check out how awesome I am. I say that as a way of explaining a lot of the pain in my story. I just feel like there's moments where God has wired me to be like, hey, you need to speak to this, and it's going to suck when you do.
mm, mhm,
And that is a theme
mm.
in my life. And I think that it all ties together, of like, I'd rather follow that. I'd rather use my voice in that and take what comes with it, come what may,
Yes.
than take the other road that like is easy and chill and
Mhm.
makes sense.
So let's say for a minute, Jeremy, there's somebody listening who is feeling stuck, who is in this cycle of certainty, who is in radical control of their life and their story. And they hear you say, I want to take a jump, or I wanted to go toward, not what was predictable and safe, but this unpredictable, almost risky adventure of life. I think I'd like to ask you a twofold question. One is, could you let us into your story in terms of what some of those risks, those unpredictable, life-giving, life-altering, life-animating jumps were? Your burn the boats, your jump off the cliff. And how would you not only tell us your story in that, but how would you coach somebody to begin to enter into that space where they could say, I want to let go of what is safe and certain and killing my soul so that I can jump into the abundant ocean of life and experience it to its fullest.
Oh, I love that, Tyler. I think everybody has this in them. And so I don't think this is like a unique, this is something that God uniquely gave me. Like, no, no, no. I think every single person listening has the same invitation that the spirit is like nudging you, like, hey, let's get crazy here. The problem is we shut it down because it is so scary. And I think some of us are just more wired. Uh, we're suckers for the punishment, if you will. Like, yeah, let's bring it on, And I think other people are probably more logical and like, that doesn't sound like a good idea, and probably doesn't. And there's just moments for me, like the most recent huge life shaping pivotal moment was, you know, I was a lead pastor 5 years ago, and in a job I would have said was my dream job, and was expecting to retire in that role. And everything made sense. Life had all been leading up to this point, decades of experience and training. And I mean, everything, it all fit, it all worked. And then, and we can get into this more if you want, but the whole George Floyd season happened and COVID happened and things started getting funky. And it was this moment for me to say, do we act like none of this is going on and play church and just preach Jesus? Or do we lean into the hurt in the community around us,
Yeah.
to the pain, and see where that takes us as a community? And I decided, let's lean into that, and realized not everybody wants to do that. And a lot of our community who had a lot of influence didn't want to. And so I was given an ultimatum of, hey, if you want to stay in this role, you need to stop talking about the things that you're talking about and literally just preach Jesus. And that to me was the choice. And I don't know that everybody gets it as clear as that was. That was presented very clearly to me, of like, you can go this way or you can go that way. And I remember, going home, it was given to me in a letter, going home to my wife. And I just said to her, like, obviously we know there's only one choice here. Like, it was so clear to us of like, we're not going to choose that other road. And yet that was the scariest moment of my life, and ushered in, I mean, years of trauma and PTSD and therapy and crying and sleepless nights. And so it's not like, well, it all works out great, everybody, and don't worry. No, it can be brutal. And yet I think we all have those moments where you realize, like, I can go two ways with this. And I think the idea of like freedom isn't, I can do whatever I want and there are no consequences. I think freedom is really, I can do what I want despite the consequences. And that's how I want to live my life, of like, I'm free to do what I sense God asking me to do, and it's gonna come with consequences, and I'm choosing those. And I think every single person has that choice in whatever the context it looks like. And so I think whenever you see that moment of like, oh, I could do this thing that I'm kind of sensing. And, it's that thing where when you lay in bed at night, you can't stop thinking about, or you wake up in the morning and you're thinking about it again. And like, I start paying attention to those things. Like, what are those things that something's stirring in me, and just trying to be aware of that,
Yep.
and then lean into that and say yes. And, I haven't always, and there's been probably plenty of times I missed it or was too afraid of it. But a few times I've said yes, and it has altered the course that I'm on and has shaped certainly who I've become today.
I mean, it sounds like, Jeremy, you're talking a lot about there was an inner voice here that was speaking to some degree. Like, there was a choice put in the letter. Okay, choose this, like, non-confrontational. We're not going to talk about justice. We're not going to talk about any of these cultural issues happening, or you can keep talking about that, but you're going to lose your job. And what I noticed is you went home and there was just a knowing. There was a deep knowing. You already knew, your soul had already told you what the decision was. You know, I'm curious, what would you say, growing up in the spaces we've grown up in, to those who would say, like, like, dude, why did you listen to your heart like that? Like, isn't our heart deceitful? Isn't our emotions a horrible guide? Like, I study the rule of Saint Benedict, and what he says at the beginning, one of the very first lines in the entire rule is, "Listen with the ear of your heart," he says.
Mm.
And that seems to have led you to a good place. Not an easy path per se, but one that did liberate you in many ways. Could you speak into that a little bit, knowing that a lot of the people that come from the places we come from, that are shaped and formed the ways we are, we're not really taught. We're taught to listen to the white dude on the stage,
Yep, yep.
not to listen to our body or our soul. How did you learn how to do that? How did you get to that place? Could you maybe speak into or encourage folks learning to do that?
Oh, Tyler, I love all your emphasis on the soul, and I know that's a lot of the work you do. I think it's super cool, and I think it's so needed because we don't, certainly in the spaces I come from, we don't give enough attention to this. I think the soul is that holistic sense of you are more than any one part of you, and we tend to like, this is who I am. And one of the things I've become very convinced of, and these days a lot of the work I do is trying to work against this. Christianity has become a very authoritarian, structured. We will tell you what to think. We will tell you what to do. You just follow along, and any sense of thinking for yourself or challenging or hey, what about, is really not encouraged. So you create these environments that then lead to the burnout and the abuse. And oh, did you hear what that pastor like? Yeah, because we've created systems of this, right? Where people are not thinking for themselves. And I was raised with a bunch of theological beliefs that I no longer have.
Mm,
And I'll give you one. And I think it was a soul turning issue in this. I grew up in Arizona, which is the Wild West.
mhm,
Everybody, probably only second to like Texas, I suspect, but like everybody out here owns guns and it's a huge gun culture. And that was normal to me. Like that's how I was raised. I owned guns as a young adult and would have used a gun on an intruder in my house and wouldn't have had a moral,
mhm.
conundrum over it. Like that was normal to me. And I had a mentor of mine, Greg Boyd, who some of your listeners may be familiar with, who was in my early or probably my late 20s by this point, but was working through ideas with me, and we were working through this. And I remember one time he asked me, "What do you think Jesus meant when he said love your enemies?"
Oh,
And Tyler, of course, I had this great and well, in that day, da, 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 this
yeah.
like whole I had been programmed to think like this. I'll never forget. Greg said something like, he listens to the whole answer and he goes, "Yeah, I think you're making it more complicated
Mhm,
than it really is." And he's like, "I think you just need to pursue this one." And I would say, looking back now, that was like a chance for me to listen to a different voice. It was that hey, what is God saying to me? What is going on here that may be at odds with everything around me? And so I started reading different things and praying and processing ideas that no one around me was processing. And then I'll never forget, I was sitting in Knoxville, Tennessee. I don't know why I was there. I was in Knoxville, Tennessee, in a hotel room. The little like chair in the corner of the hotel room, and I'm sitting there by myself, and I was reading this book about nonviolence, and I remember having this moment where just something inside of me shifted, and I could like feel it. It was almost like this visceral, like
mhm,
something just happened, and I can vividly remember this. I remember thinking, I think I just became a pacifist.
mhm, mhm,
And my next thought was, oh shit, I don't know many pacifists. Like, what does that mean? And, thinking I'm going to have to tell my wife, I'm going to have to process, like my kids, like my family, like, what does this mean? And yet that, looking back now, like that was a chance of me really listening to my soul, listening to what God was saying to me on a way deeper level. And again, it was a choice. Like, do I keep pursuing this? Do I keep listening to this? And that became, early on kind of a fork in the road for me of, hey, I'm going to start believing something that is going to put me at odds with the community that I'm in and the way that they express this.
I'm so intrigued at you mentioning the voice, right? And we tend to, like, when I use the language I'm about to use, it can almost sound so like woo-woo, or as if we would call one another crazy. But you were listening to a voice formed by many years of reading and people you listen to and parents and teachers and whatnot. But there is other voices inside.
Mhm.
And I think one of the things we so often miss out, Jeremy, on it is really taking the time to recognize, like, what voice am I actually listening to? Is it a voice that comes deep within, or is the voice that dictates much of my action actually my dad's voice, my
Mm.
dad's pastor's voice, my dad's pastor's favorite theologian's voice? Like,
Yeah.
what voice is actually in our head? What voice
Mhm.
is actually in our consciousness? And I think what you started to experience, it seems, was saying, okay, um, maybe there's another voice in here. Maybe there's a voice that comes from a deeper place, not just from my intellect, but from deeper from within.
Yeah.
As you started to shift there, I would suspect that there were two voices sometimes conflicting inside of you. Okay, you become a pacifist, you change some of your perspective, you put some new glasses on, and then tomorrow you go to work and all of a sudden you have things going in both of your ears going to war. What is that experience like? This is the experience of people so often starting deconstruction, or really beginning to maybe become more loving. But that can be so chaotic, so scary, so disorienting. Could you speak to the person that has a few voices going on? Oh, one is drawing me maybe towards love, and one is what is so safe. What was that experience like for you? How could you speak into that for others?
I love that. Yeah, recognizing the voices and the conversations in your head are that's a huge part of life. That's a huge part of growth and maturity is trying to figure out what is that voice. And I recently came across, and I'm a couple years late to this, but there's a song called High Ren by an artist, and it's a YouTube video. It's like 10 minutes long, and it's this guy singing to like his inner voice, to his inner critic. I don't know if you've seen this, but dude, freaking wrecked me when I saw this, and on so many levels. But I mean, on one level, it's like, oh my gosh, I recognize that voice in me, that voice that is like, who do you think you are? And no one likes you, and no one believes you, and you're not this, and you're not. And we all have that voice, like all have that voice, and that voice will do everything to tear you down. And here's what I have found is voice thrives in a lot of Christian spaces
Mhm.
because it hijacks a lot of the language we use and says, yeah, you are a piece of shit, that's why you need Jesus. Well, there's a part of that's like, cool, well, Jesus is going to make me good. But if I'm only believing that Jesus makes sense because I have to have so little of a view of self-esteem, then I'm not getting there in a healthy way, and that's ultimately going to create other issues. And I think we create all sorts of self-esteem issues with people the way that we present Christianity.
Mhm.
And so I think it's learning to say, like, okay, what is that voice inviting me into? And if it is a voice of accusation, or I mean, that's literally the role of Satan throughout the scriptures, like the accuser, right? So
Mhm.
it's learning to recognize like that voice isn't drawing me to fullness and to wholeness. And so I don't believe that voice. And a huge thing that's been helpful for me, and even in raising some of our kids, is a lot of times we believe we are that voice. So I had this thought, therefore that is who I am. I'm the person that thinks that thought, right? And if the thought's bad, then we just wallow in it, right? No, you're not that thought. You are the observer of that thought. And you get to observe all the thoughts in your head. Then you get to decide which thoughts you listen to, which thoughts you pursue. And so one of my favorite methods of
Mm,
prayer is something called cataphatic prayer, which is imaginative prayer. And we're getting a little mystical stuff that
let's
some
go.
people some people might be like, this sounds hippy dippy, but go with me here. So cataphatic prayer is where you calm yourself, you calm your mind, and you envision, and you can do this all different ways, but you envision having a conversation like with Jesus. And so you literally imagine you're in a space, you're at an environment. Some people will go through memories that they have and try to imagine, where was Jesus in this? And I did this one time. It was so powerful, where when I was having a really discouraging season as a lead pastor, I remember I took a couple of days and I went to the coast and just got away. And I'm like, I gotta reset some things, because I just was not, in my head was not going well. And I had this moment one evening of cataphatic prayer, and I just imagined myself. So I'm at a house on the coast. I imagine myself sitting on the beach next to Jesus. And so I'm imagining this, and then in that moment, it's this act of prayer where you're giving over your imagination, you're giving over your emotions, you're allowing your soul, if you will, to be in that moment and just like talking to Jesus face to face. And I remember in that moment, I like dumped all of this frustration on Jesus. Like, here's what I'm pissed about, and here's what I'm stressed about, and here's what's overwhelming me, and like all of this. And I, even as I'm having this moment, like I'm getting agitated, I'm getting worked up, like I can feel all of this, bubbling up. And I'll never forget, Tyler, in that I get done sharing all this, and then I look at Jesus like, all right, what are you going to say to that? And he started laughing, and it so caught me off guard. And again, this is all in this kind of imaginative prayer moment. And he starts laughing, and I'm looking, and it's not a malicious laugh. It's just like joyful laugh. And then as I'm imagining this moment with Jesus, he puts his arm around me, and he's like, I got you. It's gonna be okay. I got you. And he's saying it with like a chuckle, like, Jeremy, you're so stressed about this stuff. And like, I get it, but like, it's gonna be good. Like, I got you. And I went from like being pissed at that reaction, like, don't laugh at this. This is serious stuff, to then realizing, yeah, we're going to be okay. And so to me, it's learning to listen to that voice, right? That voice that's like, I got you. And learning to recognize the voice that tells me I'm not good enough and I'm a fake and all this. Like, that's not the voice that's worth listening to. And so I think the soul work is like, we all have these voices going all the time. You don't have to give equal weight to every voice in your head.
Mhm. Yes. The voices that draw us toward wholeness. And I think what's worth noting here, Jeremy, is that that does take practice. It does
Sure.
take work to learn to decipher which voice is which. We can become so familiar with the accusatory voice that it sounds like our own. And the work for so many of us, and it sounds like the work you've done, and even in that moment where Jesus was really pulling you toward beginning to tune into that voice of wholeness, the one that brought you toward love. I mean, really what it seems like you said, which I would completely endorse, is which voice is drawing me toward belovedness?
Yeah.
Which voice sounds like a grandma who loves the hell out of me? And if it's not that voice, I don't listen.
Oh, yeah.
And I can choose which one I listen to. I choose what podcasts I listen to because they make me a better entrepreneur. They make me a better dad. I choose what shows I watch because it makes me feel better. And we can do the same thing with the voice in our
Mm,
heads. We can choose. But first, we have to learn that there is more than one. There are
yeah.
more than
Yeah.
one stories. Um, Here you are, Jeremy, talking about imaginative prayer, seeing yourself being held by Jesus. And I would say, Jeremy, you deconstructed. You're not a pastor anymore. Deconstruction is so scary. It is so bad. Those people don't do that because they love Jesus. They just want to go sin and have sex. They just want to go, obviously I'm being sarcastic here, the fear mongering around going on deeper spiritual journeys toward deconstruction, and yet here you are talking about being embraced by Jesus. Could you speak into kind of this world of deconstruction, maybe from your perspective, but in how you have embodied it and how it has drawn you closer to Christ? Obviously, you've shared some parts of that story, but to speak a little bit more into even the people who would say, "Oh man, this is so horrible. This is so bad. People are falling out of love with God." I see somebody who seems to be more in love with God than ever. Um,
Mm.
Speak into that a little bit for us.
Yeah, I love it. The easiest analogy I give to people, and this is oversimplified, but it makes makes the point. If your car, if you're driving your vehicle and it starts doing some funky stuff, right? It's like rattling or it's sputtering or that check engine light comes on, you like know, like, okay, I got a problem. Like I gotta do something. So you're gonna take it to a shop. And what is the mechanic going to do? They are going to deconstruct your engine. They're going to deconstruct your car. They're going to start taking things apart, right? Not for fun, because something's not working. So they're going to take it apart, but they're not going to leave it, in pieces. They're going to reconstruct it again. And they are skilled to know how to do that. And so when you realize my vehicle is not working right, you need to find an environment or a person, right, who can help you deconstruct the problem and reconstruct it back again. There is a check engine light on for so many people, and it's a soul light. It's not a engine light, right? That, hey, something feels off, something's not right, something's not sitting well, and what I have learned is there are more and more people paying attention to that light and willing to do something about it. Hey, I need to figure this out. And so I would say, in the simplest terms, deconstruction is going, something's not the way it should be. I'm going to take some things off. I'm going to unpack some things, disconnect the wires, and for the purpose of figuring out what's going on here, what's funky, what's not working, what's broken. And then when we find that, when we address that, we put it back together. And so for me these days, it's both have to be part of the conversation. We have to constantly be deconstructing and we have to constantly be reconstructing. And I think that's the healthiest posture you could possibly be in if you want to follow Jesus. And the problem I have found is that there's two kind of Christian environments these days. You have what I refer to as the institutional church, which is what most people think of when they think of church, right? That's the building and that's the nonprofit status. You go there on the weekend. And they are really good at reconstructing, at building things, at momentum, at energizing, right? That's what they're really good at. Well, what they're not good at is criticizing and deconstructing and saying, hey, something here's a little funky. They're not good at that. Now, there's another community, you can call it the deconstructing community, whatever other names. It's much more nebulous, right? But there are other people following Jesus outside of those spaces, right? There are disciples being made of Jesus outside of traditional church environments. And so in those spaces, what I have found is they're really good at deconstructing. They're really good at criticizing, but where they're often weak is in the energizing, in the reconstructing part, right? And that's where they can sometimes kind of fizzle out. So to me, I see this beautiful invitation to say, let's take the best of both of these environments. Let's all come together and help each other. Let's be willing to say something's wrong. That's not the way it should be. And then let's work together to rebuild something beautiful. And yet there has to be a willingness, not only to say there is a check engine light on. I think a lot of people drive their car with all sorts of lights on and just ignore it. Like, hey, I got to my destination. I'm fine.
Yep.
And that's not about a vehicle. That's about how you live your life, right? That's a bad way to live, where you go to bed at night and you've got four lights on, on your dash. Like, that's a bad way to live. Pay attention to the lights and be willing to go into the conversation. And I think the misnomer is, well, if you deconstruct, it's because it's the sexy thing to do, or you just want to go, no, you deconstruct because you ultimately want to rebuild something better. And I have just found that you can absolutely do both of these. And that's what I'm now committed to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, in my work as a spiritual director, one of the most tragic things for me is when people have done a beautiful deconstruction, and Richard Rohr, he often talks about it like two different boats. It's like, okay, I was in this first boat, which did serve me, which is a big thing to work through as well, is
Sure.
honoring and blessing our first container or our first boat. But then we get into the second boat. We say, this first boat isn't working. It's not serving me anymore. I'm not sailing anywhere healthy. And then everybody gets into the second boat, which is a great endeavor. And then they just stand at the back of the boat and throw Molotov cocktails at the first one for the rest of their life. And they never set sail in the second boat.
Yeah.
And I just, like, so many people come into my office and have been stuck in the second boat, throwing rocks at the first one on TikTok for years.
Yeah.
When it's saying, yep, like even what you're talking about in many ways is problematic, is harmful, but like, beloved, you can set sail.
Yeah.
There is more
Keep
ocean. You
going.
just set sail. Like, getting in the second boat is really not that much. And there's not a lot of life just getting into a new boat. You must reconstruct. You must set sail. Um, so how does one reconstruct? Like, let's assume here for a minute that there are people listening here that you're speaking to who have a lot of check engine lights on. They've taken the engine apart and now they're saying, wait, the only way I've ever been taught how to build is in this old way.
Mm.
How do we rebuild the engine in a way that is holistic, in a way that does bring life? Because again, like, maybe one other just little shot here, a lot of people, I think, try to reconstruct and they just like build the exact same engine, but just make it
Mm.
Democrat. Or they just make it, they're like, be a vegan like me or else you're going to hell. I'm a vegan unapologetically, but like, there's nothing more annoying than a fundamentalist vegan. You know what I mean?
That's
Or,
big of you to say, Tyler.
I mean, it's true though, man. We are so annoying, right? Like, and it's like, okay, we deconstruct and it's more progressive or it's more inclusive or whatever, but it's still just as fundamental. Be like me or else you're the worst. And then the fundamentalism really doesn't change. How can we reconstruct truly in a way that
Mm.
actually is holistic, in a way that doesn't just repurpose a more progressive fundamentalism, but something that is actually whole?
Brilliant. So a lot of people frame it as left versus right.
Yep.
And you can take that as, use the words how you want, is Republican, Democrat, you know, progressive, conservative, however, right? So they think, okay, if I'm over here, if I, so it sounds like you and I both come from the conservative,
Yes.
right space, right? Well, then we often can frame that as, okay, then my goal for growth is to go left. And if that's how you frame it, then as you keep going, then you ultimately become exactly what you said. You just become the counterpoint on the other camp to what you came out of. And I've met progressives who are just as fundamentalist as conservatives are. They just do it in a different way with a different flavor, but it's the same thing. And you have seen this as well, right? And so you go, well, that's not it. And so to me, I think it's important the language we use. It's not to say, well, if I come from the right, I have to go left, or if I come from the left, I have to go right. That's not what growth looks like. It's the options are you are either open or you are closed. Those are your two options. So the language I use, I'm not trying to make anyone move to the left. Now, people probably accuse me of that. Like, right, you're going to these conservative spaces, you're trying to make everybody liberal. No, I'm trying to make everybody more open to the voice of God, more open to their soul, more open to who they are, more all of it. And I have found if you view growth that way of it's not going left or right, it's becoming a more open person, then you're now rebuilding something different, something holistically that is not the same, right? And so I think that's important. I also think that I have found you have to do this in community. And I think where people flame out is where they're like, all right, the church burned me. I'm going to go on my own journey by myself and then just and torch it. And you will torch it. and you'll have nothing left. It'll be a burnt out engine. And then you're going to be like, well, this sucks, you know? And so I have found you have to have a community, not, it's probably not the same community that built your engine. So you're going to have to find different spaces, but find people who are in similar walks with you. And this is the beauty of like podcasts and technology now. Like you can find these spaces. You are creating this work. I'm creating this work. Like there's lots of us creating these environments. And one of the things I started doing is an online community with people who like, we're going to, throughout the week, we're going to engage with each other in a safe space offline of Facebook and Instagram. And like, we're not going to be in the middle of that. We're going to like targeted people who want to have these kind of conversations in a safe environment. And so find spaces like that. Find people that can be your mechanic, that can say, yeah, oh, I can see what's going on with your engine right now. Like if your car isn't working and you don't know how to fix it, you wouldn't just throw up your hands and go, well, I tried. You would take it to someone. You would find someone, some person, some community that can go, oh, we know how to get that car working again. Do the same thing in life. If it's not working or you're deconstructing, you're like, I'm not even rebuilding this anymore. I don't know what to do. You've got to be open. You got to start listening, finding the voices, like you said earlier, finding the voices of who you're going to listen to. And I have found that the single greatest thing of how I offer hope to people, and this is what I've learned in my work of this, is to just remind people you're not alone.
Yes.
Because that is the single like biggest wound that people in the deconstructing community have is this belief I'm alone. No one else feels this or can relate with me or can help me. And if you buy into that lie, you're going to have a really difficult journey of creating something better.
Yeah. What has this looked like in terms of your parenting? Something I hear a lot, and honestly, I go through this. I'm asking this for me as well. When we deconstruct, I've got two little kids. My spirituality is not anywhere near what it used to be. And yet I want to pass along these teachings. I want to pass along a spirituality. I was given a framework that said, this is how you teach your kids about God. I'm kind of doing this on the fly. I'd be curious, how have you approached passing along these maybe even teachings from the Bible or Jesus postures, a more holistic and loving, open spirituality as a dad who grew up? I mean, I've also been a pastor, all of that. Like, what does that look like for you in the parenting space?
This is such a huge question, and so many people wrestle with this. And totally, I relate to everything you just said. I look at my kids sometimes and I'm like, I grew up as a preacher's kid. So,
Yep.
I mean, I was in the pews all
Me
the
too.
time. I was reading my Bible. I'd already read my Bible numerous times, in elementary school. I mean, like, I was dialed in, and that's not my kid's story.
Yep.
Like, I look at them today and I'm like, they'll ask me a question that I'm like, oh my gosh, I have failed you as a father. Like, you don't know the answer to this question. And so I think you have to just acknowledge, like, okay, your experience is different. Tyler, for a while, I had this debate with some friends of mine, and I would always ask them this question. Okay, so those of us who grew up in the conservative space, we were given that, and then we have moved through that to where we are today. So it didn't kill us. We were able to survive it, and now here we are. Would we benefit from giving our kids the same type of environment and then leading them to where we got, or do we skip it entirely and then see where they end up? And this was always the debate. I used to be able to argue both sides of this, where I could say, well, here's the pros and cons. It's no longer a debate in my head. I have worked with so many people who have unpacked so much pain and trauma from growing up in conservative evangelical spaces, from purity culture, from some of the theologies that we teach, the fear, right? The self-esteem issues that I referenced earlier. And it has affected them as adults and will affect them till the day they die. I would not wish that upon my kids ever. I don't want my kids to grow up with purity culture. I don't want them to grow up fearing the wrath of God and the fires of hell. Those are all things that I was raised with, and not because my parents are bad, because that was the environment. That was what was normal. Well, I'm not going to have my kids go through that and then have to unpack that baggage the rest of their life. So for me, I would be lying if I said there's never like a sense of, oh boy, I hope this doesn't go poorly. Because I don't know where this goes. It's so different. But I have conversations with my kids and I try to present to them the wider spectrum of what Christianity offers. So for example, if my kids ask me, "Hey dad, what does the Bible say about hell?" or "What's the deal with hell?" Well, the way I was raised is if I would have asked that question, I would have been explained, here's eternal conscious torment. This is what the Bible teaches. This is what you need to be afraid of. Boom. End of conversation, right? That's how I was raised. For my kids, I'm like, well, kids, throughout history, Christian history, the church has had primarily three views of this. Let me articulate the three views for you. And I'll explain the three dominant views that the church has had. And then I'll say which one makes the most sense to me, which one I was raised with, and all that. And then just kind of let them make their own decision. And they're at an age where they're still young enough where most of them just kind of go along with what we believe because they don't really know otherwise. But they're going to get to a point. I had this conversation with my daughter last night. I was explaining what a straw man argument was to her, and I was like, this is how a lot of people have conversations. And so she's understanding things. And I said to her, you're going to grow up and you're going to go, okay, this is what I was raised to believe. And then you're going to hear counterpoints on everything, politics, theology, whatever. And I said, I want you to already have heard all of these ideas. Like, I don't want some professor or some, friend of theirs to be like, well, have you ever heard of this view of hell? And my kids would be like, what? Like, that was me in my 20s. Like, there are more than one view of hell. Like, I didn't know that, I don't want that part to be my kid's story. So they may not land where I would ever want them to land. And like, that's how life works, right? But at least they're having these conversations. They're becoming aware of all this while we still have the chance to have those conversations. And I think as a dad, as a parent, that's the best thing you can provide your kids. Like, hey, we're going to talk through all this while you're still in this space so that when you are on your own, you have the best shot of logically, and working through these in a healthy way.
Yeah, I love that. That's so awesome. The most confrontational I've ever heard Richard roar, and I've listened to a lot of his content over the years, was in this parenting space and people asking him these questions. And the guests were getting kind of riled up about just all the trauma and all the old things, and he goes, "You can still tell them about Jesus." He's like, "You," and like, and like, when I hear that, like, one of the things I like to kind of do with my son, and he's still pretty young, but say, what would Jesus say about that? Like, okay, this is what you heard from these people or these other, and we've got a lot of friends that are still in the evangelical spaces and people we love. And what would Jesus say about that? Or we say, what would your mom say about that?
Mm.
Like because their mom, my wife, is so kind and loving and open-minded and so gracious. What would mom say about that thought? Do you think that feels like, would your mom do that to you?
Mm. Love that.
Talking about like hell or so, and it's like, okay, and just really trying to attach what does love feel like as it pertains to these perspectives, and really
Yeah.
saying, kind of the Bradley Jurasek, like a more Christ-like way of reading this scripture, or and really trying to just teach them, what does Jesus feel like, and then that can be the lens, or what does love feel like, and let that be the lens through which we can maybe try to interpret or learn.
But you're teaching your kids there to think for themselves,
Yeah, yeah.
right? You're not answering their question.
Mhm.
You're teaching them to say, hey, does this look like mom?
Yeah.
Does this look like Jesus? Right? Like, you're getting them to think. And I think that's the secret right there, is like, rather than, I think we were primarily raised with, here's the right answer, here's what you should believe. I think our generation is trying, at least, to say, let's teach our kids how to think, how to process these ideas. And one of the things I heard someone say recently, and I was like, oof, that is so true. They were saying, if you teach your kids to have a voice, they will use it on you first. And so my kids will talk back, and not in a disrespectful way, but like they will challenge things that we say. And it can be annoying, right? Where you're like, because I said so, like, just like, but then I have to remember, no, they're practicing, they're using their voice. And that's what's going to keep them from some authoritarian leader bulldozing over them as an adult,
Yes.
because they will have developed the ability to say, that looks like bullshit. I'm not following that. That doesn't look like my mom. That doesn't look like Jesus, right? You're teaching that now, and that's the skill that's going to serve them well, not did they land on the same opinion as you on any given subject.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, I had to apologize just the other day. There's a bird that was a bird flew into our window the other day, and the kids saw it and they went out and it was still alive. And so we went and we're trying to tend to it, and I picked it up and went and put it in the little bird feeder and was like whatever, and and then I was like watching it flutter outside the window and it died. And the kids were so fascinated by it, like we were watching it and close or whatever. And the kids went downstairs, they were watching Bluey or whatever. And then they came back up and I had the bird in my hands and I was trying to take it into the garbage. And it was so sad. And and then they're like, my son Elias was like, "What is that?" And I was like, "Oh, it's nothing." And I was just trying to hide it, you know. And he goes, "That's not nothing. You're holding something." And I'm like, and then I was like, okay. And then I started, going through the whole thing. Okay, death is a part of our life. I shouldn't hide it. Okay. Well, buddy, it was the bird. And so then we cried about it, whatever. And then makes me think of The Office when the bird died in the office.
Yeah.
Um, and then 20 minutes later, my son came down here into my office and he goes, "Dad, you lied to me." And he like he put
Whoa.
my feet to the fire. And he's like, "Dad, you lied up there." And I was like, "Yeah, dog, you're right. I did, and I had to own up to it." But his willingness to even come downstairs and like, because I hadn't apologized yet, I really didn't think about it. I thought I was protecting him. I thought I was doing my best, and
Mm,
I did show him the bird. And then he came down and said, "Yo, dude, like,
mm.
like that little dude was bringing out the best because he has, I think, hopefully in our house, been given permission to use his voice and to
Well, he
question
he
things."
feels safe
Yeah.
to have that conversation with you, which is a testament to the environment you've created in your home.
Yeah. And then I had to apologize, which is such a important thing. Let me ask you a question. Now, we've talked a little bit about deconstruction. We've talked a little bit about the spaces we've evolved from. What do you love or what have you kept from the original spirituality that you inherited? Like
Mm.
what's some of the fruit that is still been made manifest in your story now, that you've kept, that is still something you love, that you still hold deep within you?
Ooh, that's a good question. The answer, I mean, this is going to sound corny, but it's like Jesus has been the thing that I've held on to as I've challenged everything around Jesus. And I get asked regularly, well, why do you, if you're deconstructing this and you don't want to be in this space, why are you still a Christian?
Yep.
Because I'm in awe of Jesus. Like I continue, like as I study Jesus, I continue to be like, this guy shows something so beautiful that the world needs, that I need, that we would all be better if we followed this. Like this is a better way. And I think Christianity has got so much wrong and has blurred so much of who Jesus is. And so a lot of the specifics of like, my like if I could rank my, top 10 theologies as a kid in the church versus my top 10 theologies today, like probably very different. I don't even know a lot of them would be the same, but Jesus has always been the center, and I'm more enamored, more
Yeah.
in awe of who Jesus is, and the kind of God that Jesus reveals like is super fascinating to me. And even as I look at like our country, you know being ripped apart in so many different ways, It's like Jesus shows a God that models enemy love.
Mm.
Like that's a pretty radical idea that not a lot of religious ideas around the world, really embody. Like, no, love your enemy. And I remember even years ago, one time I was in Israel and Palestine on a trip, and we were talking to this rabbi and, ask him, hey, what, like, the Old Testament talks about, you are blessed to be a blessing and, all this. And like, what do you think that means? And how do you view? And I remember in that conversation realizing, like, oh, if you never got to Jesus, you really don't have this huge sense of like you need to love your enemies. And so that helped me understand like the modern political way that Israel functions today. Like they don't have that Jesus ethic. And then I remember thinking like, wow, Jesus really is offering us something fundamentally different than the way of the world. And so to me, it's like I just constantly, that's the biggest thing. I'm just always rebuilding around Jesus and then using that almost as like, okay, the way I often say it is good theology is theology that looks like Jesus. So when you're coming up with what is my theology on hell? Okay, well, good theology is theology like looks like Jesus. So which understanding of hell looks the most like Jesus to you? Right. And take that across the board. Well, what's my view on whatever? Which theology looks the most like Jesus? And process that through. And so to me, it's not a lot of the other things have been the same. I will say practically the thing that I probably love more now than I used to is communion. I
Mm.
was raised with communion. We did communion every week. That was the tradition. And I always just like, yeah, that's what you do. You eat the little wafer, no big deal. I have grown to have a love of communion. Like I think communion is pretty special. And I actually really like the way the Catholic Church does it, where it's I don't theologically go where they go with it, but the way they honor it, the way it's an experience, the way like that's kind of what the service is designed around, I really think is a beautiful expression. So a lot of the things that I do today when I try to have conversations with people is kind of recreating that communion type environment. So I would say that's the one I've held on to communion. I really like that. It's good stuff.
Well, speaking of communion, tell me a little bit about wine.
Mm.
And you've centered a lot of your work around wine language, and I'm sure some of that has to come from a passion of wine as well. Take us down that road as it relates to communion, or as it just relates to a hobby and something that Jeremy just loves.
So I would say I was like I would dabble in wine, like anybody else. Like, yeah, I'll have a glass of wine and like, what do you drink? Like, I don't know, Cabernet. Like I was never like the wine guy. Moved to Oregon to go become a lead pastor, and we were invited by someone in the church, like, hey, you want to go out to the wineries with us like on a Saturday? And I'm like, okay, I come from Arizona. We don't have a ton of wineries. Like, it's not a really a thing. So it was like an hour drive from where we lived, and we went out to these wineries, and I I don't know how else to say. This is the phrase I use. My soul came to life when I was there. Like literally, I don't know if you've ever just been to a place that you're like the frequency or how I don't even have the language to use. Something just like resonated with me. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can breathe like different. Like it's like something physically, emotionally, spiritually, just being in that environment. And so seeing the rolling hills and all this, and then sitting around, this table with friends, and you're having these glasses of wine, that just incredible experience, listening to people talk about the way they've created it. I mean, it was like all of it just like clicked. And so that's when I'm like, I'm a wine guy. Like I became a wine guy, and we became a member of that place because I'm still a member of that first winery that has like special place in my heart.
Yeah.
But that really became this thing. Well, then what we started doing, Tyler, is like we would then invite people from our church community. Like, hey, like we'd take a couple, my wife and I would say, hey, let's go out to the winery, on Saturday. We'd love to like, get to know you better. So we would have this incredible interaction with people in our community. And I mean, when you're sitting over a tasting with a flight of wine, people are so honest with you. I mean, they're telling us their life story and the good and the bad and their hopes and their dreams and disappointments. I mean, like phenomenal conversations. But then I would see them at church the next day, and it was like a completely different version, right? They're prim, they're proper, they're put together. And I was like, who are you? Like, where's the person yesterday? Like, I want that person. And I remember thinking even then, like, something about the space where we're doing this is shaping the conversation way more than I ever realized. And I started noticing it, right? Saturday to Sunday, Saturday, Sunday. Well, then after I stepped away from all that, we ended up moving back to Arizona, not because we wanted to. It was more of like, how do we survive? Because we, lost our community in Oregon. But we ended up buying a couple rental homes in Oregon wine country. And so now, I run those, but I also get to go out and do events there and stuff. And so then we created this thing called Communion Wine Co., which was my wife's idea. She comes up with a lot of really good ideas. And we were having a conversation where I was like, how do I get to do the things that I really want to do? She's like, well, what would that be? I'm like, I don't know. Talk to people about Jesus, drink really good wine, and somehow have a way to do it, also in Oregon. And she was like, all right, let's figure this out. So we're literally what we create. That's how it started. And we've done, I mean, all kinds of different gatherings and experiences. And what I have learned is the space in which you have the conversation completely shapes the way the conversation goes. And so now, one of the things we do regularly is we'll meet in a wine bar here in Arizona. We kind of take over a wine bar for an evening. We'll do a wine flight and then a guided conversation experience about Jesus. And Tyler, I'm telling you, I've heard people say things that I would never hear them say in a church in a million years, because they walk into a wine bar and nothing clicks of like, oh, here's how I'm supposed to behave. Here's what I'm supposed to do. There's nothing. When you walk into a church building, there are all sorts of things, and they may be subconscious that people are doing. I just have noticed a complete difference. And so now I'm super passionate about using the tool of wine to help people see the beauty of Jesus. And it's like, it's a gateway to like, I'm going to get you to experience Jesus in a totally different way. And I'm going to use wine to do it. And I just have learned like wine's pretty incredible. So I was like, it's a bonus. I also really like that.
Yeah, that's so good. Oh, we could just talk so much more about that. And I haven't even gotten into, like, I used to run cocktail bars, and I owned a coffee company. And so,
Oh, nice.
wine and coffee are cousins in so many ways. And oh, I love that so much. And one thing I'll, just from my story, bro, was like, I had grown up just so much in the Christian bubble. I mean, I'm like a fourth, if I'm still considered a pastor or whatever, I don't know, but like fourth generation, grew up in very conservative, whatever. And, I had a season where I would preach around the world and things. And then, but I stopped that, and then I needed a job. And then this guy who used to roast coffee at a coffee shop I went to, he said, "Hey, Tyler, like, you've got a great personality. Do you want to come help me open my cocktail bar?" I was like, dude, I've never drank alcohol in my life yet. And then he takes me to this really classy, like really cool. It's called the principal's office. Is in an old school building
That's
that they
clever.
that they rejuvenated, and it's super dope. But what happened to me there in the cocktail bar in terms of just bursting the bubble? And then I got to sit across the bar with these people who I was always taught was my enemy, who
Hmm.
I was always taught were so different than me. And not only did I get to see that they were so lovely, but again, to your point, in this space, these conversations that were infinitely more authentic. And that's where I fell in love with hospitality, which then
Hmm.
in turn actually transformed into my love for Disneyland because of the
Okay. Yeah.
acute nature of cultivating radically hospitable environments. And that's when I started obsessing over Disneyland actually was because of the service industry trying to create a great cocktail bar, learning how they create these great experiences. But it was this way that the industry and these drinks pulled me toward other folks and
Hmm.
pulled me toward great communion and conversation and love with them that I owe good drinks everything in that regard.
Hmm.
Um, because of how it drew me out of just seeing the world through this linear kind of lens and expanded me to just a more cosmic way of seeing people. And one of my favorite stories to tell was at the bar. And there was this couple, is this lesbian couple. They had known each other. They had been dating since middle school. They dated in secret in the
Wow.
so I mean, to think that long ago, was just so radical. But they would come in not knowing that I was like this Baptist kid or whatever, and they would both every Saturday afternoon, they'd come in, they would get one, and they would both give me a kiss on the cheek, and I was just like, this is not what I was told.
Yeah.
And they didn't ask me what I believed. They didn't. It just was what they just were who they are. And anyways, I owe good wine, good
Mm,
hospitality, these environments, Jeremy, that you're creating everything. And so just to endorse what you're talking about, bro, and the work you're doing, these environments do matter tremendously.
mm.
And I'm excited to with you continue to build them. Um what are some of the as we start to land the plane here, I'd be curious, who, Jeremy, are some of the voices that are um, molding you, that are continuing to form you, that have formed you on this journey as you found yourself in a more healthy and holistic spirituality? What are some of the voices or places or people that have helped formed you in this way?
So I would say twofold. I get to do this online community with people now, and that has been really, really healing for me is to walk this road. And it's the closest that I've had since I was a lead pastor. And the thing I probably missed the most about being a lead pastor is I felt like every week I was with the same people. We were going on a journey somewhere. And I
Mhm.
felt like it was like every week we're building on where we were last week. Now, obviously, not everybody attended every week, but that idea of like we're all in this together, we're going somewhere. And I do a lot of guest preaching now, but you don't get that with guest preaching, right? You pop in for once, and and you're not usually there week after week. So doing this online community has been the coolest way to like it's the same people every week. And we do book studies. So every couple of months we go through another book and we get to like unpack these ideas in community. And I get to hear their perspective, their stories, their journeys, how they're reacting to it. And that has been so influential to me. And I would say that's what gives me hope when things look dark and I want to like throw in the towel and be like, all of this is like torch it all. I think about like specific people that I know and I'm watching. I'm like, no, but look at them. Like, look how they're navigating. Like, and so it's like very hopeful. And so I would say that's the everyday environment that I'm getting a lot of that from. And I also have found there's so many people, you've mentioned Richard Rohr. He's a huge one. Brian McLaren has written some really helpful stuff. We went through one of his books. I don't know if I'm allowed to say Rob Bell,
Mhm.
but Rob
Oh
Bell
yeah.
continues to be someone that I
Big
just am
time.
in awe of his journey and how he has navigated that and been willing to go where he senses, that nudge leading him, even though it like people are like, you're crazy. Um, there's so many people like that. We're reading a book by Diana Butler Bass right now that it's been hugely influential. Brian Zond, Greg Boyd. There's so many incredible voices, and it's just been cool. There's also a community online that I'm finding a lot of people like yourself who there's more of these conversations happening. It doesn't feel as much of an anomaly of like what the heck is that? Like there's more people where you're going, oh yeah, you can connect. And the first time someone sees it, it's like that's heresy. The 10th time you're like, okay, there are a lot of people who are wrestling, and so I think there's something to that. And yeah, I'm a big believer you can't do it alone. You gotta have voices that you're listening to, that are speaking into it, that are encouraging you, because it can be a very discouraging journey.
Yeah. You mentioned this just a little bit ago. Um, the way our self-esteem sometimes gets formed in more fundamentalist places. And there's a way I've been ending this podcast as a way of teaching my audience how to do this, as well as I just think it's a gift for my guests as well. Um, as we wrap up, Jeremy, would you be willing to just tell me five or six things that you absolutely love about yourself? Like, what is just the parts of you that you absolutely adore? And I just would love to hear you talk about you and the parts of you, like I think about in Psalm 139 when David does this big self examination. He gets to like verse 12 or 13 and he goes, God, I praise you for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. I know that full well. And the homie is talking about himself. He is looking in the mirror and saying, God, you crushed it. Jeremy, what do you love about you?
Oof. This feels very vulnerable, man. Oof. I like that. I'm gonna remember this. I'm gonna remember this question. Well, I think there's a few things I would say I love about me. I love that I am willing to follow Jesus wherever Jesus wants to take me. And I think my story has shown that. And I'm very grateful for that part of me. That's something I feel like I can fail in a lot of things, but at least I was willing to say yes to those things that I sensed at least Jesus asking me to do. I feel like I am a good husband. I love my wife. I feel like I'm in a season now, especially leaving the ministry, where I'm a better husband than I ever was. I feel like I'm a better father these days than I ever was. And, I'm able because of the way both my wife and I work from home. And so we're around a lot for our kids. And our kids almost think that's normal. Like every family has parents who are home all the time. And we try to explain to them, like, no, actually, it's not normal. Most families, have a parent that has to go, to an office for the majority of the day. And so it's almost like our kids are not realizing that's unusual, and they will at some point when they get older. And so I'm grateful that I'm able to invest in their lives. Um, what am I at, three there?
Hmm.
I like that I'm willing to entertain competing ideas, and I can sit in that space. I like that about me,
Yeah.
that I don't have to have, I can be in a conversation where you can say, I believe this, and I can say, I believe this, and they're radically different. And I don't feel any sense that I have to win you over
Mhm.
for there to be peace. And I've noticed that's um, it's a unique gift.
Mhm.
I don't know if you're an Enneagram fan. I'm an Enneagram 8, and I
Mhm.
like that about me. I think a
Mhm.
lot of 8s are complete assholes, and I think I'm a healthy 8, and I
Love
haven't
it.
always been a healthy 8, but in this season I feel like I use my 8 for the benefit of others.
Mhm.
And the world needs the world needs every number to be healthy, but there's some, I've seen as an 8, there's a unique role we can play,
Yes.
and there's a lot of unhealthy 8s, and so
Yeah.
8s they get really bad rap, and probably deservedly. But yeah, I there's been a number of moments where I feel like I've been able to do good because of the way I'm wired. And I'll go toe to toe with anybody.
Mhm.
um and learning how to do that in a healthy way. But there's also a moment where things are not as they should be, and someone's going to need to stand up to it. So
Yeah. I love that. That is so good. Um, so speaking of an eight, being an eight, and you mentioned your prophetic nature, the burden that is sometimes being a prophet. Um, maybe for my last question for you, Jeremy, is what would you say is your, if this is triggering, sorry, but what is your prophetic message right now? Like, what is the message that God has put on you in this moment of time, um, to put out there? Like, what is Jeremy's message right now that God has put on your tongue, that God has put in your soul, that God has put into you uniquely to be shared? What is Jeremy's message to overflow? into the universe?
Mm. Whew. Yeah, just quickly answer
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
humongous
Yeah,
question.
maybe more like for this day and time. I mean, even like I mean, we can call it what it is. This podcast is going to come out in a while, but like I mean, the Charlie Kirk murder was yesterday for those who are listening. So like that's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, we are, and yet you're a very self-regulated person. We're not sitting here hot and panicked, even though it sucks and it's a really weird day. Um, but like, what's your message for maybe this moment in time or this moment of your story? Maybe not your whole theology, but just for a person that you might meet at Starbucks and they said, "What are you about today, my friend?"
I think the world is very ugly right now in a lot of ways. And we're seeing the ugliness displayed because it's always been there, but it's being displayed and broadcast in ways that we probably haven't seen, at least in our generation. And I think the message I would want to give people is it doesn't have to be this way. And I'm inviting people and I'm working towards spending my efforts to a better imagination.
Mm,
And I think this is what Jesus is offering us, a better imagination. And so the goal that I have each and every day is to bring some beauty into the world that day. The world is ugly.
mm,
It's getting uglier. And yesterday was an ugly day with ugly reactions to it. So today I wake up and I choose beauty and I choose to say, let's work toward beauty. And I believe that if enough of us
mm,
would be willing to just say, today I work toward beauty, I work toward something that makes the world a little less ugly than it was. That's that's how you create something fundamentally different, something alternative, right? And that's what I believe Jesus is calling us into. And I get that beauty from Jesus. I look to him and go, what is Jesus offering us? It's something beautiful that's not
mm.
the ugliness of this world. And it doesn't have to be the way it is.
Yes. Mm, so good. Jeremy, where can the people find you out there on the internet? You mentioned online communities and some things that you do. Where can the people find you and your work?
Yeah, jeremyjernigan.com is where that's like my site where you can get access to all of it. There's a couple podcasts that I do. There's a deconstructing podcast I do, a reconstruction podcast that I do, and do weekly blog posts and newsletter and try to stay busy with all of that. And all of that can be found at jeremyjernigan.com.
Great. And of course, that will be linked below. Jeremy, what a blast this has been. I can't wait to do it again. Man, we'll have to take a trip to Anaheim someday.
Oh,
I'm
this
not
would be
kidding,
so
dude.
fun.
I am about it. And even have some wine down there. I can down there in California Adventure.
You and I would make some good trouble at
I
Disneyland, Tyler.
I think so. My bro, thank you so much. And thanks for being a guest here on the Tyler Hill podcast.